calendar notification popped up on my screen at 8:17 a.m., immediately turning my peaceful morning ritual into something else entirely. Mandatory meeting, 9 a.m., conference room A. Attendance required. No agenda, no explanation. Just those cold, impersonal words from Robert Winters, the COO I'd watched climb the corporate ladder while stepping on everyone beneath him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'd been with Preston and Blackwell Investment Group for 12 years. 12 years of canceled vacations, missed family gatherings, and middle-of-the-night calls to fix crises that weren't mine to begin with. 12 years of building their wealth management platform from a clunky legacy system into something that managed billions in assets. 12 years of watching others take credit for my innovations. And now, a cryptic meeting notification 3 days before Christmas. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the bitter taste matching my mood. In years past, that notification would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety, mentally rehearsing everything I might have done wrong. But something had changed in me over the past several months. A quiet resolve had formed, like a pearl around a painful grain of sand. "Everything okay, Sophia?" My assistant Nora poked her head into my office, her brow furrowed with concern. "Just another mysterious summons from Robert," I replied, closing my laptop. "Nothing I haven't handled before." She nodded, unconvinced. "Well, I finished organizing the client files for year-end review. And those holiday cookies from your sister are in the break room. Everyone's loving them." I smiled. Nora had been with me for 5 years, one of the few people at Preston and Blackwell who saw the invisible work that kept the firm afloat. "Thanks. Nora, save me one of those chocolate ones before the analysts descend." As she left, I straightened my charcoal blazer and gathered my tablet. The corporate machine didn't stop for anyone, especially not during the holiday season when client anxieties ran high and markets fluctuated with year-end jitters. Walking to conference room A felt like a slow-motion sequence in a film. I passed the investor wall where my portfolio strategy for the Marshall account had saved the company millions, though it was Jason's name on the recognition plaque. I walked by the sleek technology hub I'd fought to implement when Robert had insisted. Our outdated systems were good enough. 3 awards for innovation sat prominently displayed. None mentioning my name, of course. I paused outside the frosted glass doors of conference room A, taking a moment to center myself. Through the glass, I could see Robert's distinctive profile alongside Heather from HR and Gregory Kent, the CEO who'd inherited the company from his father and treated it like a trophy rather than a responsibility. I opened the door precisely at 9 a.m. "Ah, Sophia," Gregory said, not bothering to stand. "Right on time, as always. Please, have a seat." Robert didn't meet my eyes. That was the first tell. Heather's expression was professionally blank, but her fingers fidgeted with her pen. Second tell. "Thank you for joining us this morning," Gregory continued, his voice carrying that practiced gravity executives develop for moments they think are significant. "I'll get straight to the point. After careful consideration of our strategic direction and organizational needs, we've decided to eliminate your position effective immediately." The words should have hit like a truck. But strangely, I felt nothing but a detached curiosity, almost like watching someone else's life unfold from a distance. "We've prepared a severance package," Heather interjected, sliding a manila folder across the polished mahogany table. 4 weeks' pay for every year of service, continuation of benefits through January, and access to our career transition services. I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I looked directly at Gregory, then at Robert, who still wouldn't meet my gaze. "May I ask why?" My voice was steady, calmer than it had any right to be. Robert cleared his throat. "The role of Chief Technology Strategist has become redundant with our new organizational structure. We're shifting toward a more streamlined approach. Redundant, I repeated, the word hanging in the air between us. After 12 years of building your entire technological infrastructure, Gregory shifted uncomfortably. This is a business decision, Sophia, not a personal one. Your contributions have been valuable, but not valuable enough to keep around, I finished for him. I understand perfectly. Heather looked relieved that I wasn't causing a scene. We'll need you to return your company laptop and security badge by the end of the day. Martin from IT will assist you with transferring any personal files. I nodded once, rising from my chair with the dignity I'd carried through a decade of being underestimated. Thank you for the opportunity. 4 simple words, delivered without a hint of sarcasm or bitterness. Gregory looked surprised at my composure. He'd probably expected tears or protests, maybe even begging. He didn't know me at all, despite my 12 years of service. Nobody at Preston Blackwell really did, except perhaps Nora. Well, that's good, he stammered. HR will walk you through next steps. I smiled slightly. That won't be necessary. I know my way out. As I turned to leave, Robert finally spoke up. Sophia, wait. The Marshall account review is scheduled for January 3rd. Is there anything the team should know before you go? The audacity of that request nearly made me laugh. After telling me I was redundant, he still expected me to ensure a smooth handover for one of our biggest clients. Everything's documented in the shared drive, Robert, though you might want to check my notes on their risk tolerance. It's been evolving. With that cryptic comment, I walked out, closing the door softly behind me. The whispers started immediately as I returned to my office. News travels fast in the financial world, especially bad news. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years suddenly found their shoes fascinating as I passed. A few brave souls made eye contact, their expressions a mix of sympathy and relief that it wasn't them. I didn't waste time on sentimentality. My personal belongings were few: a framed photo of my niece's graduation, a small potted succulent that had somehow survived years of neglectful watering, and a worn copy of The Art of War that my father had given me when I first entered the finance world. Know your enemy, he'd written inside the cover. How prophetic that had turned out to be. Nora appeared in my doorway, her eyes wide. Is it true? She whispered. I nodded, continuing to pack my things into a small banker's box the IT department had reluctantly provided. Apparently, I've become redundant. Her face crumpled. That's insane. No one knows the systems like you do. What about the Marshall account? The Reynolds portfolio? The new trading platform rollout? Not my problem anymore, I said, surprising myself with how liberating those words felt. Though I suspect they'll figure out soon enough what they've done. Nora hesitated, then stepped into my office, closing the door behind her. Sophia, I need to tell you something. I overheard Robert and Gregory talking last week. They're planning to present your integration algorithm at the shareholders' meeting in February as Robert's innovation. I stopped packing for a moment, letting that information settle. Of course they are. Then I smiled, but I'm not worried about it. Her brow furrowed in confusion. You're not? No, I said, carefully wrapping my small succulent in tissue paper. Some things have a way of working themselves out. What Preston Blackwell didn't know, what no one there could possibly have suspected, was that 6 months earlier, I had received a discreet email from Eleanor Zhao, founder and CEO of Meridian Capital Partners, their most formidable competitor. Your reputation precedes you, she had written. Would you consider a conversation about your future? At first, I dismissed it as a recruiting attempt, perhaps even a conflict of interest trap. But something made me accept that initial coffee meeting. Maybe it was the way Robert had taken credit for my algorithmic trading model at the quarterly review. Maybe it was watching Gregory promote his golf buddy to head of digital strategy despite the man not knowing the difference between blockchain and a spreadsheet. Or maybe it was simply exhaustion, the soul-deep weariness that comes from pouring yourself into work that others claim as their own. Whatever it was, that coffee with Eleanor had changed everything. "I'm not looking to hire you, Sophia," she had said, surprising me completely. "I'm looking to partner with you." She then outlined a vision so ambitious it took my breath away. Meridian wasn't just looking for talent. They were planning to revolutionize wealth management through proprietary technology that would render traditional firms like Preston and Blackwell obsolete, and they wanted my expertise to help build it. But there was more. Eleanor didn't just offer me a job, she offered me equity, a seat on the board, and most importantly, the freedom to build, something with my name on it. By the time HR was preparing my termination papers, I had already secured my future at Meridian, not as an employee, but as a founding partner in their new fintech division. And I'd done it all while continuing to excel at Preston and Blackwell, never giving them reason to question my loyalty until they decided I was dispensable. "Nora," I said quietly, "would you be interested in a change of scenery?" Her eyes widened. "You already have something lined up, don't you?" I smiled. "Let's just say I saw the writing on the wall a little sooner than they expected. I'll be in touch soon." Martin from IT arrived at my office door, looking uncomfortable. "Ms. Chen, I need to, collect your devices and deactivate your access." "Of course," I said, handing over my company laptop and phone. "Everything's been backed up to the cloud, as required by policy." What I didn't mention was that the everything excluded certain innovations I'd developed on my own time, innovations that would soon become cornerstone technologies at Meridian. "Your badge too, please," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. I unclipped the security badge I'd worn for 12 years and handed it over without ceremony. "Any other corporate possessions you need to reclaim on this festive day?" He winced at my calm sarcasm. "No, that's it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm sorry about this, Ms. Chen, especially right before Christmas." "Don't be," I replied, picking up my small box of belongings. "Some endings are really beginnings in disguise." As I walked through the trading floor toward the elevator, a strange hush fell over the normally chaotic space. Dozens of eyes followed my progress, some curious, others uncomfortable, a few even sad. I held my head high, making eye contact with anyone brave enough to look directly at me. Just before I reached the elevator, I spotted Robert huddled with the executive team near the conference room, already planning how to divvy up my responsibilities. Our eyes met briefly, and for a moment, I considered saying something cutting, something that would make him remember this moment with regret. Instead, I simply smiled and gave him a small nod. The kind of acknowledgement you might give to someone who has unwittingly done you a tremendous favor. The December air hit me like a shock as I exited the prestigious address that housed Preston and Blackwell's headquarters. Snow was falling gently, transforming Chicago's financial district into something almost magical. I stood for a moment looking up at the gleaming skyscraper where I'd spent the last 12 years of my life, feeling strangely light despite the circumstances. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Is it done?" I typed back, "Yes, sooner than expected. They let me go this morning." Her response came immediately. "Their loss, our gain. Come to the office when you're ready. We have champagne." I smiled at my phone, then slipped it into my pocket. As I walked toward the parking garage, another text came through. This, one from Nora. "Whatever you're planning next, I want in." That made me laugh out loud, the sound carrying in the crisp winter air. I replied, "Lunch tomorrow. I'll tell you everything." What Preston and Blackwell couldn't possibly know was that I wasn't just heading to a new job. I was walking toward something much more significant. You see, when Eleanor had approached me about joining Meridian, she'd also shared a unique opportunity. The firm was preparing for a major round of private investment to fund their expansion, and she'd offered me the chance to be part of it. So 6 months ago, I'd taken my savings, the results of 12 years of disciplined investing and modest living, and become a silent investor in Meridian Capital Partners. Not just any investor, but one of their largest private backers in this funding round. And 3 months ago, Meridian had made a bold move that few in the industry fully understood yet. They'd begun strategically acquiring small but significant stakes in several companies, including, yes, Preston and Blackwell Investment Group, which meant that technically, I was now part owner of the company that had just fired me. The delicious irony of that fact warmed me more than my wool coat as I walked through the gently falling snow, heading not toward an uncertain future, but toward a carefully orchestrated new beginning. Robert, Gregory, and the rest of Preston and Blackwell's executive team had no idea what was coming. No idea that the redundant employee they'd so casually discarded was about to become one of the most influential figures in the industry. No idea that the technological advantages they'd taken for granted were about to serve a new master. And most importantly, they had no idea that in exactly 3 weeks, when they presented Robert's groundbreaking integration algorithm to the shareholders, they would be explaining it to a room that included me, not as their former employee, but as a representative of their new major investor group. Sometimes, karma doesn't need to be orchestrated. Sometimes, it arranges itself perfectly all on its own. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this all began, and how I transformed from a dedicated team player into someone who finally decided to play by her own rules. It started, as many endings do, with what should have been a beginning. Last Christmas, exactly 1 year before my unceremonious dismissal, I had been scheduled for my first real vacation in 3 years. 2 weeks in Bali, a trip I'd been planning meticulously for months. My sister Emma would be meeting me there with her family, the first holiday we'd spend together since our parents passed away. The flights were booked, the beachfront villa was paid for. My out-of-office message was crafted with uncharacteristic excitement. For once, I was prioritizing myself over Preston and Blackwell. 3 days before my departure, disaster struck. Or rather, Robert Winters engineered one. Sophia, we need you to stay. The Morrison Fund is threatening to pull their $80 million if we don't fix the reporting issues before year-end, he announced, barging into my office without knocking. Gregory wants all hands on deck. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. The Morrison account was indeed significant, but the reporting issues were cosmetic at best, formatting preferences that any junior analyst could handle. Robert, my flight leaves on Friday morning. I've had this vacation planned for... We all make sacrifices, he interrupted, his tone suggesting this was non-negotiable. That's what separates the executives from the support staff. The casual demotion in his phrasing wasn't lost on me. Despite my title and responsibilities, Robert had always viewed me as glorified IT support rather than a strategic leader. The Morrison issue is minor, I said, keeping my voice level. I've documented the fix. Tyler can implement it with his team easily. Robert's expression hardened. Tyler is taking his family to Aspen for the holidays. He has children, after all. The implication hung in the air, that my family obligations somehow mattered less because I didn't have children of my own. It wasn't the first time this particular bias had surfaced at Preston and Blackwell. I have family too, I said, quietly. And I've already rescheduled this trip twice for work emergencies. Look, Robert sighed as if I were being unreasonable. Gregory specifically asked for you to handle this. He trusts you with the Morrison relationship. Take it as a compliment. I took a slow, deep breath. Where will you be during the holidays? Robert? He blinked, surprised by the question. St. Bart's with Melissa and the kids. We go every year. He said this without a hint of irony or self-awareness. But I'll be available by email if anything critical comes up. Of course he would be. That was the executive privilege at Preston and Blackwell. The C-suite could work remotely from luxury destinations, while the rest of us sacrificed our personal lives at the altar of client satisfaction. Fine, I said, the word like ash in my mouth. I'll cancel my plans. He nodded, already turning to leave. I knew we could count on you, Sophia. That's why you're so valuable to the team. Valuable, but not valuable enough to respect my time or personal boundaries. Valuable, but apparently not irreplaceable, as I would discover a year later. I called Emma that night to deliver the news. Her disappointment was palpable, even through the phone. Soph, you can't keep doing this, she said, her voice gentle but firm. They'll take and take until there's nothing left of you. It's just, this one last time, I promised, though we both knew the hollowness of those words. The Morrison account is crucial, and no account is worth missing your life for, Emma interrupted. Mom and Dad didn't work themselves to the bone so you could do the same. She was right, of course. Our parents, immigrants who'd built a successful small business through relentless work and sacrifice, had always emphasized that their efforts were meant to give us more choices, not fewer. More freedom, not less. I know, I said softly. I'll make it up to you. It's not about making it up to me, Sophia. It's about what you're doing to yourself. Emma paused, then added, I'm worried about you. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? I couldn't answer that question, which was an answer in itself. The next morning, I officially canceled my vacation, losing thousands in non-refundable deposits. Emma and her family went without me, sending photos of tropical sunsets and beachside dinners that I viewed during my brief breaks from the Morrison project. The Preston and Blackwell offices were eerily quiet during that holiday week. Most of the staff had left for vacation, leaving behind a skeleton crew of junior associates and the unfortunate few who, like me, had drawn the short straw. I worked 14-hour days, rebuilding the Morrison reporting system from scratch rather than simply applying the quick fix I'd proposed. If Robert wanted to sacrifice my vacation for this, I would ensure the result was flawless. On Christmas Eve, I was alone in the office until 11 p.m., finalizing the documentation. The cleaning staff had long since departed. The security guard, on duty, looked surprised to see me when I finally headed toward the elevator. Working late on Christmas Eve, Ms. Chen? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. That's dedication. I smiled tiredly. Or madness. Hard to tell the difference. Sometimes. He nodded sagely. My father used to say, no one on their deathbed wishes they'd spent more time at the office. Those words followed me home to my empty apartment, where a small artificial tree stood in the corner, surrounded by wrapped gifts I'd never had. The chance to deliver in person. I poured myself a generous glass of whiskey and stood at my window, looking out at Chicago's skyline, all glittering lights and holiday decorations. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my resentment. Not just for the canceled vacation, but for years of similar sacrifices. For the promotions that went to less qualified colleagues who played golf with Gregory. For the casual way Robert presented my ideas as his own. For the persistent feeling that no matter how much I gave to Preston and Blackwell, it would never be enough to earn true recognition. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Merry Christmas. Sis, wish you were here. Attached was a photo of her family on a beach at sunset. The empty space beside them a poignant reminder of my absence. Something broke inside me that night. Not in a dramatic, shattering way, but in the quiet manner of ice cracking beneath. Pressure, a small fissure that would gradually spread until the entire structure gave way. I made myself a promise as I raised my glass to the empty room. This would be the last Christmas I sacrificed for Preston and Blackwell. Christmas Day itself was a blur of work, punctuated by brief video calls with Emma and her family in Bali. I put on a brave face, asked about their adventures, and didn't mention that I'd spent the morning fixing a minor glitch in the Morrison system that could have easily waited until after the holiday. By December 26th, the Morrison reporting system was not only fixed, but enhanced with features that would save them millions in operational efficiency. I sent the completed project to Robert with a detailed overview and implementation guide, copying Gregory and the client team. Robert's response was a terse, "Thanks, looks good." No acknowledgement of my holiday sacrifice, no recognition of the additional improvements I'd incorporated. Just those 3 dismissive words. The following day, I received an email that Gregory had personally called Edward Morrison to walk him through the executive team's solution to their reporting concerns. The client was thrilled, apparently, and had committed to increasing their investment with Preston and Blackwell in the new year. No mention of my name. No credit for the hours spent perfecting a system that went far beyond the original requirements. Just another instance of my work being absorbed into the nebulous accomplishments of the team, or worse, attributed directly to the executives. I returned to a full office after New Year's, greeted by colleagues who were refreshed and recharged from their holiday breaks. Robert was sporting a deep tan from St. Bart's. Tyler from the tech implementation team was eagerly showing off photos of his family skiing in Aspen. Even Heather from HR had taken a week-long cruise. "How was your holiday, Sophia?" asked Nora, the only person who knew the full extent of my Christmas work marathon. "Productive," I replied, the word tasting bitter. "Very productive." She gave me a sympathetic look. The Morrison system is brilliant, by the way. I heard the client called it revolutionary. "Thank you for noticing," I said quietly. Later, that same day, the quarterly bonus announcements went out. Despite the Morrison success, a client Gregory himself had described as critical to our growth strategy, my bonus was exactly the same as the previous years. No increase, no special recognition. Meanwhile, Robert received a special performance award, announced in the company-wide email as recognition for his outstanding leadership in strengthening key client relationships, particularly the successful retention and expansion of the Morrison Fund. I stared at that email for a full 5 minutes, watching as congratulatory replies piled in. Something hardened inside me, that crack from Christmas Eve widening into a chasm. That evening, instead of working late as usual, I left precisely at 5:30 p.m. I walked to my favorite coffee shop, ordered a cappuccino, and did something I'd never done before. I updated my LinkedIn profile. Not with any specific intention to leave, but as a small act of self-preservation, a reminder that Preston and Blackwell wasn't the only option in my professional universe. Within an hour, I had 3 connection requests from recruiters. One was from a major bank, another from a tech startup, and the third, the one that caught my attention, was from Eleanor Zhao at Meridian Capital Partners. Her message was brief but intriguing. "Your work with algorithmic trading systems is impressive. I'd like to discuss how it might align with Meridian's future. Coffee sometime?" I hesitated before responding. Meridian was Preston and Blackwell's most aggressive competitor, known for its innovative approach and rapid growth. Talking with them could be seen as a betrayal, perhaps even a violation of my non-compete clause, depending on the nature of the conversation. But then I remembered Robert lounging on a Caribbean beach while I worked through Christmas. I remembered Gregory taking credit for my solution. I remembered 12 years of similar patterns, of being essential yet invisible. I typed my reply, "Coffee sounds great. When did you have in mind?" That single message, sent in a moment of quiet rebellion on a January evening, would ultimately change everything. Not just for me, but for Preston and Blackwell, for Meridian, and for the industry ecosystem we occupied. The meeting with Eleanor was scheduled for the following week at a small cafe far from the financial district, minimizing the chance of running into anyone from Preston and Blackwell. I told myself it was just a conversation, just exploring options. No commitment, no betrayal. Yet as I approached the cafe that morning, I felt a flutter of both anxiety and excitement. This was uncharted territory for someone who had defined her professional identity through unwavering loyalty for over a decade. Eleanor was already seated when I arrived, her presence commanding even in the casual setting of a neighborhood coffee shop. In her early 50s, with silver streaks in her black hair and impeccable posture, she exuded the confidence of someone who had built something from nothing. "Sophia," she said, rising to shake my hand. "Thank you for making the time." Curiosity got the better of me, I admitted, settling into the chair across from her. She smiled. "Good. Curiosity is underrated in our industry. Too many people are comfortable with the status quo." The conversation that followed was unlike any recruitment pitch I'd ever experienced. Eleanor didn't start by offering a position or discussing compensation. Instead, she asked questions, insightful, probing questions about my work, my approach to financial technology, and my thoughts on where the industry was heading. "The wealth management space is due for disruption," she said, studying me carefully. "The old guard, firms like Preston and Blackwell, are dragging their feet on innovation because the current model serves their leadership well enough." I nodded cautiously. "There's certainly resistance to change in established firms." "That's diplomatic," Eleanor said with a knowing smile. "Let me be more direct. Your algorithmic trading platform, the one that drove the Morrison funds, exceptional performance last quarter. How much recognition did you receive for that innovation?" I stiffened. "How do you know about my work with Morrison?" "Edward Morrison is an old friend," she said simply. "He was quite impressed with the system. Mentioned your name specifically when we had dinner last month. A client had acknowledged my contribution to someone outside the firm, yet within Preston and Blackwell, my name had been erased from the narrative. The recognition was minimal," I admitted. Eleanor nodded as if this confirmed a theory. "That's typically how it works in traditional firms. The technical architects remain behind the curtain while the Gregory Kents of the world take center stage." Her casual mention of Gregory's name caught me off guard. "You've done your homework. I make it my business to understand the competitive landscape," she replied, "including who the real talent is." She paused, then continued more deliberately. "Sophia, I didn't ask you here to offer you a job at Meridian." I felt a flash of disappointment, followed by confusion. "Then why am I here?" "Because I'm offering you something much more significant than employment." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. "I'm offering you partnership." She proceeded to outline her vision. Meridian was establishing a new division focused exclusively on financial technology, not just supporting their existing business, but developing standalone products that would transform how wealth was managed, transferred, and grown. "We don't need another employee," she explained. "We need a co-founder for this venture. Someone with the technical brilliance to build what doesn't yet exist and the industry knowledge to make it relevant. Someone like you." I listened with increasing interest as she described the opportunity: equity ownership, decision-making, authority, and the freedom to pursue innovations without bureaucratic constraints. Everything I'd been denied at Preston and Blackwell. "Why me?" I asked finally. "There must be dozens of technologists in your network." Eleanor's expression became more serious. "Because you've done the impossible, created true innovation, within a system designed to resist it. That requires not just technical skill, but persistence, strategic thinking, and a certain resilience." The word resilience hung between us, weighted with meaning. She knew somehow about the battles I'd fought, the obstacles I'd overcome, the compromises I'd made. And rather than seeing those experiences as irrelevant corporate baggage, she valued them as essential qualifications. "I'm still under contract with Preston Blackwell," I said, voicing the most immediate practical concern. "There's a non-compete clause." Eleanor nodded. "I anticipated that, which is why I'm not asking you to leave immediately. What I'm proposing is a careful transition. You continue at Preston Blackwell while we lay the groundwork for your eventual move to Meridian. When the time is right, perhaps after your next bonus cycle, you make the shift officially." It was strategic, methodical, and more than a little subversive. It was also tremendously appealing. "And if Preston Blackwell discovers this arrangement in the meantime?" I asked. Eleanor's smile took on a sharper quality. "They won't, unless you tell them. And even if they did, we would handle any legal complications. Meridian protects its own." Those 5 words, "Meridian protects its own," resonated deeply. When had Preston Blackwell ever protected me? When had they ever fought for my interests the way I'd fought for theirs? "There's one more aspect to this proposition," Eleanor continued. "An investment opportunity. Meridian is preparing for a significant capital raise to fund this expansion. As a prospective partner, you would have the option to participate as an investor as well. You want me to invest in Meridian?" The suggestion was unexpected. "Only if it aligns with your financial goals," she clarified. "But yes, I'm offering you the chance to own a piece of the company beyond your compensation package, to have skin in the game on multiple levels." The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from technical architecture to market positioning. By the time we said goodbye, no formal decisions had been made, but something fundamental had shifted in my perspective. I walked back to Preston Blackwell that afternoon, seeing the gleaming office tower differently, not as my professional home, but as one option among many. Perhaps not even the best option. Over the following weeks, I met with Eleanor and her team several more times, each conversation reinforcing my growing conviction that Meridian represented not just an escape from Preston Blackwell, but a path toward the professional fulfillment I'd been seeking. I began working nights and weekends on preliminary designs for Meridian's new platform, careful to use only my personal devices and to focus on concepts rather than specific code that might trigger intellectual property concerns. Meanwhile, at Preston Blackwell, I maintained my usual level of performance, excellent enough to avoid suspicion, but not so extraordinary as to draw unwanted attention. I documented my work meticulously, creating detailed guides that could eventually serve as my legacy after departure. And I watched. I observed how decisions were made, how credit was distributed, how power flowed through the organization. I noticed patterns I'd been too busy to see before. The systematic exclusion of certain voices, the preferential treatment of others, the small daily injustices that accumulated into institutional culture. In March, I made my decision. Using funds I'd carefully saved and invested over the years, I committed to becoming an investor in Meridian's private funding round. It was a significant sum, nearly everything I had outside my retirement accounts. But the risk felt right, aligned with my values and vision in a way no investment had before. Eleanor's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Welcome to the other side of the table, Sophia. You're now officially a Meridian stakeholder." What neither of us could have anticipated was how quickly events would accelerate from there. In April, Meridian began a strategic acquisition campaign, purchasing small but significant stakes in several competing firms. This was positioned publicly as portfolio diversification, but insiders recognized it as Eleanor laying groundwork for greater industry influence. One of those quiet acquisitions was a 47% stake in Preston Blackwell Investment Group. When Eleanor informed me of this development, I felt a strange sensation, somewhere between vindication and vertigo. I was now, through my investment, in Meridian, indirectly a part owner of the company that had consistently undervalued my contributions. Is this ethical? I asked during a secure video call from my apartment. Eleanor's expression was thoughtful. It's entirely legal, if that's your concern. As for ethics, I believe in creating balance in systems that have become unbalanced. This is simply a market correction. I understood her meaning. For years, Preston and Blackwell had extracted value from my work without providing proportionate reward or recognition. This new arrangement didn't erase that imbalance, but it did create an unexpected symmetry. As spring turned to summer, I continued my double life. Outwardly, the dedicated Preston and Blackwell executive, privately the architect of its competitor's future. The cognitive dissonance was occasionally jarring, but also oddly liberating. For the first time in years, I felt I was steering my own course rather than simply executing someone else's vision. In June, Robert announced that the annual client conference would be held in September, featuring our groundbreaking advancements in algorithmic trading systems. The irony wasn't lost on me. The advancements he referred to were largely my creations, innovations that would soon benefit Meridian rather than Preston and Blackwell. During this period, I began to identify potential team members who might eventually join me at Meridian. Nora was an obvious first choice. Efficient, loyal, and far more technically savvy than her administrative role suggested. I also noted several junior analysts whose talents were being wasted under rigid management. July arrived with a sweltering heat wave that seemed to match the rising tension at Preston and Blackwell. The atmosphere had grown increasingly strained as rumors of organizational restructuring circulated through the office. While others worried about their positions, I maintained a careful facade of professional concern that masked my true feelings, a peculiar mix of detachment and anticipation. My clandestine partnership with Meridian had progressed rapidly over the previous months. Eleanor and I now spoke almost daily. Our conversations centered on the architecture of what would become their flagship wealth management platform. What had begun as conceptual discussions had evolved into detailed planning sessions with Meridian's core development team. "You've thought of contingencies I wouldn't have considered for years," Eleanor remarked during one of our secure video calls. She was reviewing my comprehensive risk analysis for the platform's launch. "This is exactly why we need you leading this division." I smiled, feeling truly valued perhaps for the first time in my professional life. Experience with catastrophes makes you better at avoiding them. We both knew which catastrophes I was referring to. The multiple near disasters at Preston and Blackwell that I'd quietly resolved over the years. Emergencies that senior leadership had never fully comprehended, let alone acknowledged. "How are things at your current firm?" Eleanor asked, her tone casual but her intent clear. "Interesting," I replied carefully. Gregory called an all-hands meeting yesterday to discuss market resilience strategies which translated to potential budget cuts. Robert looked particularly uncomfortable. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Our intelligence suggests they're facing significant pressure from institutional clients. The Morrison account has been making noise about diversification." "Funny you should mention that," I said. I received a rather panicked email from Robert yesterday asking me to review the Morrison portfolio analytics before their quarterly meeting. Apparently, there are inconsistencies in the reporting. "Inconsistencies you could fix in your sleep," Eleanor observed. "Precisely, but I'm taking my time with it. Thoroughness is important after all." This subtle form of resistance, not outright sabotage, but simply withdrawing the extraordinary effort that had become my unacknowledged standard, had become my new normal at Preston and Blackwell. I no longer stayed until midnight fixing problems others had created. I no longer volunteered solutions before being asked. I performed my role competently, but the passion that had once driven me to go far beyond expectations had been redirected toward my future at Meridian. The following day, I met with Marcus from legal to review my Preston and Blackwell employment. Contract. As one of the few colleagues I genuinely trusted, I'd fabricated a story about being approached for an advisory board position at a startup, claiming I wanted to ensure there were no conflicts of interest. Your non-compete is fairly standard, Marcus explained, flipping through the document in his small, windowless office. Prohibits working for direct competitors for 1 year after termination. Restricts use of proprietary information. The usual restrictions. He glanced up at me. But there's something interesting here in Section 12B. What's that? I asked, genuinely curious. There's a clause about automatic termination of the non-compete in case of layoffs or position elimination. His expression was thoughtful. Not something I see in every contract. It was probably included back when the firm was smaller and more employee-friendly. I tried to keep my face neutral, despite the surge of excitement this information triggered. That's good to know, though I'm not planning on leaving. Marcus shrugged. Still, always smart to understand your options. The employment landscape has changed dramatically in recent years. That evening, I forwarded this crucial detail to Eleanor, who responded immediately. This changes our timeline. Let's talk. Our conversation that night shifted the entire strategy. Initially, we had planned for me to resign from Preston Blackwell after securing my year-end bonus in December, accepting the non-compete limitations and focusing on non-competitive aspects of Meridian's business for the required period. But if your non-compete becomes void in case of termination initiated by them, Eleanor said, her voice animated with new possibilities, we have a much cleaner path forward. You're suggesting I try to get fired? I asked, both amused and apprehensive. Not at all, she replied. I'm suggesting we prepare for that possibility and recognize it as potentially advantageous, rather than something to be avoided. The implication was clear. If Preston Blackwell decided to eliminate my position, I would be completely free to join Meridian immediately, with no competitive restrictions. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. There's something else we should discuss, Eleanor continued. Our investment position in Preston Blackwell. Meridian had been steadily increasing its ownership stake through carefully structured purchases that kept them just under regulatory disclosure thresholds. What had begun as a 4-7% stake had grown to nearly 8%, making Meridian one of Preston Blackwell's largest non-institutional shareholders. We're approaching a strategic decision point, Eleanor explained. We can either maintain our position as silent investors, or we can prepare to take a more active role in governance. The implications of this shift made my head spin. Active governance would mean board representation, influence over executive decisions. Precisely, Eleanor confirmed. And while we're not there yet, we're laying the groundwork, which makes your position even more valuable. My internal knowledge of Preston Blackwell's operations, combined with Meridian's growing ownership stake, created a powerful synergy, one that could potentially reshape the competitive landscape of wealth management. What do you need from me? I asked, fully committed to this new direction. Documentation, Eleanor replied without hesitation. Everything you can legally compile about operational inefficiencies, strategic vulnerabilities, technical debt. Nothing confidential or proprietary, just your professional assessment of systems you've helped build. I spent the next week carefully assembling this analysis. Working late in my apartment, I created a comprehensive overview of Preston Blackwell's technological infrastructure, its strengths, weaknesses, and critical dependencies. I focused particularly on areas where my departure might create significant gaps, systems that others might understand in theory but couldn't maintain in practice. This wasn't about sabotage. It was about clearly mapping the impact of my eventual absence. Information that would be valuable whether I left voluntarily or was pushed out. Meanwhile, at Preston Blackwell, the atmosphere continued to deteriorate. Gregory had instituted bi-weekly performance alignment meetings where department heads were required to identify potential cost-cutting measures. Robert, increasingly, harried and short-tempered, had begun micromanaging projects he'd previously ignored. He asked me for daily status reports on the Reynolds implementation, Nora told me one afternoon, her expression bewildered. As if he's suddenly interested in the technical details he's been ignoring for years. Interesting timing, I remarked casually, though I suspected I knew the reason. The Reynolds project was one I'd designed from the ground up. Robert, likely sensing my gradual disengagement, was scrambling to understand a system he'd previously been content to present as his own achievement. August brought another significant development. Eleanor informed me that Meridian had secured a prime location for their new Chicago headquarters, a sleek building in the downtown financial district, just 6 blocks from Preston and Blackwell's offices. "We're finalizing the lease next week," she said. "And one entire floor is being designed according to your specifications for the technology division." The reality of my impending transition suddenly felt more concrete. This wasn't just theoretical planning anymore. Actual physical space was being prepared for the team I would soon lead. "I'd like you to review the floor plans," Eleanor continued, "especially the secure development areas and the innovation lab concept you proposed." That weekend, I met with Eleanor and Meridian's facilities team at the empty building, entering through a service entrance to maintain discretion. Walking through the unfinished space, with its concrete floors and exposed ductwork, I felt a strange sensation of standing between worlds, still technically employed by Preston and Blackwell, but already helping to build its future competitor. "This section will be the collaborative workspace," the architect explained, gesturing to a large open area. "With the private development pods along the perimeter, as you requested. And here," he pointed to a glass-enclosed corner, "is the director's office. Your office, Ms. Chen." The possessive pronoun struck me forcefully. My office. Not a workspace assigned to me by others, but a space designed to my specifications, acknowledging my authority and vision. "The sightlines work well," I said, professional in my assessment despite the emotional undercurrent. "Good balance of visibility and privacy." Eleanor watched me with a knowing smile. "It helps to see it in person, doesn't it? Makes everything more real." She was right. Standing in that unfinished space, I could visualize the future more clearly than ever. The team I would build, the culture I would foster, the innovations we would create together. A future where my contributions would be recognized rather than appropriated. As we were leaving, Eleanor touched my arm lightly. "There's something else I'd like to discuss, away from the others." We found a quiet corner in the lobby where she continued in a lowered voice. "Our investment committee has approved an acceleration of our acquisition strategy regarding Preston and Blackwell." My pulse quickened. "Meaning, we're preparing to cross the 10% ownership threshold within the next month," she explained. "Once we do, we'll file the necessary disclosures and formally request board representation." The timeline was moving faster than I'd anticipated. That will certainly cause a stir at the executive level. Indeed. Eleanor's expression was carefully neutral. And it may prompt certain organizational reactions. We both understood what she was suggesting. Once Meridian's significant ownership position became public, Preston and Blackwell's leadership would likely implement defensive measures, potentially including restructuring or elimination of positions they deemed vulnerable or non-essential to their core strategy. "I should be prepared for turbulence," I said. Eleanor nodded. "But remember, turbulence that works in our favor. Every scenario has been modeled, Sophia. Whether you remain at Preston and Blackwell through the end of the year or transition sooner, we're ready." That conversation marked a psychological turning point. I was no longer simply planning a career change. I was engaged in a sophisticated chess match with multiple possible outcomes, all of which ended with me in a stronger position than where I'd started. The following week brought unexpected developments at Preston and Blackwell. A major institutional client announced they were reducing their assets under management with the firm by 30%, citing concerns about innovation stagnation and next-generation advisory capabilities. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Gregory called an emergency executive meeting where, according to Nora, who had heard from Gregory's assistant, there was shouting, blame-shifting, and talk of significant operational changes. Robert summoned me to his office the next morning, his manner uncharacteristically conciliatory. "Sophia, I need your assessment of our technical competitive position," he said, closing his door for privacy. "Specifically regarding our algorithmic trading systems and client-facing technology." I maintained a carefully neutral expression despite the irony of the situation. After years of minimizing the importance of technological innovation, Preston and Blackwell's leadership was suddenly desperate for the insights they had previously ignored. "I'd be happy to prepare a comprehensive analysis," I replied. "Though I should note that I've submitted several technology roadmap proposals over the past 3 years that addressed these very concerns." Robert had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Yes, well, the landscape has changed. We need fresh thinking." "Fresh thinking or fresh packaging of existing recommendations?" I asked, allowing a hint of challenge into my voice. He blinked, clearly unaccustomed to this more assertive version of me. "Both, I suppose. The board is asking hard questions about our competitive positioning." I nodded slowly. "I'll have something for you by the end of the week." The report I prepared was entirely truthful yet strategically crafted. I outlined Preston and Blackwell's genuine technological strengths while highlighting the structural issues that had prevented true innovation: the siloed departments, the risk-averse middle management, the reward systems that incentivized short-term thinking over long-term development. I also included a section titled Critical Personnel Dependencies that subtly illustrated how many key systems relied on the institutional knowledge of a few individuals, myself chief among them. Robert's response to the report was telling. Rather than addressing the systemic issues I'd identified, he fixated on quick fixes and surface-level changes that could be immediately presented to the board. "We need to rebrand the client portal," he announced in a subsequent meeting. "Something modern, cutting-edge, and we should accelerate the mobile app update." I exchanged glances with Tyler from the tech implementation team, who looked equally unimpressed by this superficial approach. "Rebranding without fundamental improvements will only highlight the limitations of the underlying systems," I pointed out. "Clients aren't fooled by new interface colors." Robert waved away this concern. "We need visible changes by the quarterly client conference. Gregory wants announcements he can highlight in his keynote." This short-sighted focus on appearance over substance reinforced my conviction that I was making the right decision in leaving. Preston and Blackwell was trapped in patterns of reactive thinking that prevented true innovation, patterns I would be free from at Meridian. By early September, the pieces of my transition plan were falling into place with remarkable precision. Meridian's new office space was nearing completion, with furniture installation scheduled for October. Their ownership stake in Preston and Blackwell had reached 8%, just below the threshold that would trigger public disclosure requirements. Eleanor and I had mapped out the technical migration strategy for clients who might follow me to Meridian, ensuring all approaches were legally compliant while maximizing ease of transition. We had also identified 6 key Preston and Blackwell employees, including Nora, as potential recruitment targets once my move became public. Most crucially, we had developed a detailed launch strategy for Meridian's new wealth management platform, timing its release to coincide with the industry's annual technology conference in January, a deliberate challenge to Preston and Blackwell's traditional dominance at this event. Throughout this planning, I maintained my professional responsibilities at Preston and Blackwell, though I had begun a subtle but significant shift in my approach to documentation. Every system I maintained, every process I oversaw, was now meticulously recorded in shared repositories accessible to the broader team. I created detailed troubleshooting guides, comprehensive architecture diagrams, and even recorded video walkthroughs of complex procedures. To an observer, this might have appeared as exemplary professional conduct, ensuring business continuity through robust knowledge sharing. In reality, it was my way of ethically extracting myself from systems that had relied too heavily on my personal intervention. This heightened documentation also served another purpose. It demonstrated conclusively that many of Robert's innovations had been designed, implemented, and maintained almost exclusively by me. The paper trail was clear and undeniable. The third week of September brought the quarterly client conference, an elaborate affair held at an upscale Chicago hotel where Preston Blackwell showcased its strategies and capabilities to current and prospective clients. Historically, these events had featured Gregory and Robert prominently, with technical staff like me relegated to breakout sessions or behind-the-scenes support. This time, however, was different. "We need you on the main stage," Robert informed me with surprising directness. "For the Technology Innovation Panel, Gregory specifically requested your participation." The reason for this sudden elevation became clear when I reviewed the attendee list. Edward Morrison was scheduled to attend, along with representatives from 3 other major clients who had specifically praised my work in recent surveys. "Of course," I agreed readily, happy to participate. The panel discussion was scheduled for the second day of the conference. That morning, as I prepared my talking points in my hotel room, I received a text from Eleanor. Meridian Board approved final acquisition phase. Disclosure filing scheduled for October 15th. My heart raced at the implications. Within a month, Preston Blackwell would be forced to publicly acknowledge Meridian's significant ownership position, a revelation that would undoubtedly trigger organizational turmoil. The Technology Innovation Panel itself was revealing in ways Robert probably hadn't anticipated. When asked about Preston Blackwell's approach to algorithm development, he deferred to me with an expansive gesture. "Sophia is the real genius behind our systems. I simply provide the strategic direction." This public acknowledgement of my contributions, so at odds with his usual pattern of appropriation, signaled his growing awareness of my value to the firm. Whether driven by genuine recognition or merely self-preservation, the shift was notable. After the panel, Edward Morrison approached me directly, bypassing Robert entirely. "That predictive volatility model you developed has saved us millions this quarter," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Brilliant work, Sophia." Robert, hovering nearby, looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," I replied. "I'm glad it's performing well for your portfolio." "More than well," he insisted. "We're considering consolidating more of our assets with your team based on these results." Robert immediately stepped in. "We'd be delighted to discuss an expanded relationship, Edward. Perhaps dinner next week?" Morrison nodded politely to Robert before turning back to me. "Will you be part of that discussion, Sophia? I'd like to hear your thoughts on some adjustments to our risk parameters." "Of course," I said smoothly, though I knew there was a good chance I might not be with Preston Blackwell by the time that dinner occurred. As Morrison walked away, Robert turned to me with an unreadable expression. "The clients seem quite attached to you." "I've worked hard to understand their needs," I replied simply. "Yes, well, remember that client relationships belong to the firm, not to individuals," he said, a hint of warning in his tone. I met his gaze steadily. "Of course. Just as innovations belong to those who create them, right?" He had no response to that pointed reference to his history of claiming credit for my work. The evening reception that concluded the conference was a lavish affair, with flowing champagne and carefully crafted messaging about Preston Blackwell's commitment to forward-thinking wealth management for a changing world. I circulated as expected, engaging with clients and colleagues while maintaining my professional demeanor. Near the end of the event, Gregory cornered me near the dessert table, martini in hand. "Excellent work with the Morrison presentation," he said, his usual brusqueness softened slightly by alcohol. "Robert tells me you've been developing some interesting new approaches to portfolio optimization." "I've been exploring several promising avenues," I confirmed, careful not to oversell concepts that might soon benefit Meridian rather than Preston and Blackwell. He nodded, eyes narrowed slightly as he studied me. "You know, Sophia, I've always thought you were somewhat underutilized in your current role." The comment was so unexpected that I barely managed to maintain my composed expression. After 12 years of treating me as little more than a technical resource, Gregory was suddenly hinting at greater recognition. "That's an interesting perspective," I said carefully. "We should discuss your future with the firm when we're back in the office," he continued. "There may be opportunities opening up in the strategic leadership team." I wondered what had prompted this abrupt change, whether Edward Morrison had said something to him, whether the recent client defections had highlighted the importance of technical leadership, or whether there were rumors about my potential departure. "I'd welcome that conversation," I replied, non-committal. As I left the hotel that evening, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a certain satisfaction in this belated recognition, but also a deep certainty that it came too late. The path I had chosen with Meridian offered something Preston and Blackwell never could, even with a promised promotion: true ownership of my work and my future. The following morning, I met Eleanor for breakfast at a quiet restaurant away from the conference. She listened intently as I recounted the previous day's events, particularly Gregory's unexpected overture. "It's predictable," she said when I finished. "They're finally recognizing your value because they sense you slipping away. Classic retention panic." "You don't think I should consider whatever he's offering?" I asked, more as a thought exercise than from genuine uncertainty. Eleanor's expression was serious. "Sophia, ask yourself this. If they truly valued your contributions, would it have taken 12 years and the threat of losing you to acknowledge it? Would you have spent last Christmas working alone in the office, while Robert enjoyed St. Bart's?" She was right, of course. No last-minute promotion or recognition could erase the patterns of a dozen years. And even if Preston and Blackwell suddenly transformed its culture overnight, they could never match what Meridian was offering: true partnership, equity ownership, and the chance to build something that would bear my name from the beginning. Besides, Eleanor added with a hint of a smile, "Our plans are already in motion. The board filing is prepared, the office space is nearly ready, and we've identified the initial client targets for transition." Among those targets, I knew, was the Morrison Fund, a fact that added another layer of irony to Robert's recent attentiveness to my contributions in that relationship. As September drew to a close, I focused on finalizing my preparations for either scenario: an orderly resignation after my year-end bonus, or an earlier departure triggered by organizational restructuring. My personal finances were arranged to weather a potential gap in income. My most important digital files were backed up. Only personal notes and legitimate work products, nothing that would violate confidentiality agreements. My professional network was quietly activated through subtle LinkedIn updates and selective industry conversations. Most importantly, my mental preparation was complete. I had crossed an invisible threshold from employee to entrepreneur, from order taker to strategist, from resource to partner. Whatever happened in the coming weeks, I was ready. The first week of October brought a flurry of activity at Preston and Blackwell. Gregory announced a strategic review of all business units to be conducted by an external consulting firm. Department heads were instructed to prepare comprehensive operational assessments, including staffing ratios and efficiency metrics. "It's a bloodbath in the making," Marcus from Legal confided during a quick coffee break. "Word is they're looking for 15% workforce reduction across all divisions." I nodded thoughtfully. "Any specific targets identified yet?" Nothing official, he said, lowering his voice further. But rumor has it they're focusing on redundancies in specialized functions and consolidation of technical capacities. The euphemisms were clear enough. Technical specialists, people like me, were in the crosshairs. This didn't surprise me. In fact, it aligned perfectly with the scenario Eleanor and I had anticipated following Meridian's disclosure of their ownership stake. What did surprise me was the timing. This restructuring initiative was launching before the disclosure, suggesting other financial pressures were accelerating Preston and Blackwell's cost-cutting measures. Later that day, Robert called me into a private meeting to discuss the operational assessment of our division. We need to identify efficiency opportunities, he explained, using the sterile language of corporate downsizing. Areas where we might be over-resourced. I kept my expression neutral. And you'd like my input on the technical side? Exactly, he confirmed. Where could we potentially consolidate roles? Are there specialized functions that could be absorbed into more generalized positions? The irony was almost painful. Robert was essentially asking me to help design my own elimination, to identify how my role could be distributed among others or deemed unnecessary. I'll need to think about it, I replied carefully. There are complex dependencies in our technical architecture that aren't immediately obvious. He nodded, seemingly relieved that I was engaging constructively rather than resisting. I'd appreciate your thoughts by Friday. The executive committee is meeting next Monday to review preliminary recommendations. As I left his office, I felt strangely calm. The machinery of corporate restructuring was in motion, accelerating toward the very outcome that would benefit my transition to Meridian. If Preston and Blackwell eliminated my position as part of this initiative, my non-compete clause would be voided automatically, allowing me to step immediately into my new role. That evening, I updated Eleanor on these developments. This is actually ideal timing, she observed. If they make these decisions before our ownership disclosure, it simplifies our narrative considerably. We can position your joining Meridian as a response to their restructuring rather than as a competitive recruitment. I agreed with her assessment. The only question is whether I'm on their cut list. Based on everything you've described about Robert's approach, I'd be surprised if you weren't, Eleanor said. He's likely looking for technical functions he doesn't fully understand but believes could be outsourced or distributed. Her prediction proved remarkably accurate. The report I prepared for Robert was factual and comprehensive, outlining the technical architecture of our division, without deliberately highlighting or minimizing my role within it. I simply presented the systems as they existed, with their interconnections and dependencies clearly mapped. When I delivered this assessment on Friday as requested, Robert's response was telling. He focused immediately on the sections describing specialized algorithm development and system architecture, precisely the areas where my expertise was most concentrated. These seem like functions that could potentially be handled by the broader development team, he suggested, his tone casual despite the implication, or even partially outsourced to our technical vendors. That would be a significant shift in our approach, I noted. Those systems currently require specialized knowledge of our proprietary methods. Robert waved away this concern. Everything can be documented and transferred. No one is irreplaceable, after all. The statement hung in the air between us, a corporate platitude that revealed more about Preston and Blackwell's fundamental philosophy than perhaps Robert intended. No one is irreplaceable. Not even someone who had built their core systems from the ground up over 12 years. Not even someone who had sacrificed countless holidays, weekends, and personal milestones for the firm's success. You're right, of course, I said finally. No one is irreplaceable. But as I left his office, I knew with absolute certainty that Preston and Blackwell was about to test that theory and discover just how wrong it could be. The weekend passed quietly as I finalized my contingency preparations. I updated my resume, though I wouldn't need it for Meridian. I organized my home office for the likelihood of remote work during the transition period. I even began sketching preliminary org charts for the technology division I would soon lead. Most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for what was coming. Whatever happened in the Monday executive meeting, I was ready to move forward without regret or resentment. Preston Blackwell had been an important chapter in my professional story, but not its conclusion. On Monday morning, I arrived at the Yowie office early, brewed my usual coffee, and settled in to review client reports with my customary focus. If this was to be one of my final days at Preston Blackwell, I would ensure my work remained impeccable until the very end. Around 10:30 a.m., a calendar invitation appeared in my inbox. Meeting with HR and senior management, 2:00 p.m., conference room A. No agenda, no explanation. Just a summons that mirrored countless corporate executions I had witnessed over the years. I felt a moment of surreal clarity as I accepted the invitation. The corporate machine was functioning exactly as designed, following its programmed protocols for eliminating redundancies without recognizing the true value of what it was discarding. As the appointed hour approached, I straightened my desk, backed up my final personal notes, and prepared for the meeting that would not end my career, but transform it. The future I had carefully constructed with Eleanor was about to begin. The glass doors of Meridian Capital Partners gleamed in the morning sunlight as I approached them for the first time as an official employee. 1 week had passed since my termination meeting at Preston Blackwell, 7 days that had felt simultaneously like an ending and a beginning. I paused for a moment before entering, taking in the sleek architecture of the building. Unlike Preston Blackwell's ostentatious headquarters with its marble columns and intimidating facade, Meridian's offices projected a more modern sensibility, glass and steel arranged in clean lines that suggested innovation rather than tradition. Ms. Chen, the security guard greeted me with unexpected warmth. Ms. Zhao is expecting you in the executive suite. I nodded my thanks, surprised to be recognized immediately. At Preston Blackwell, I had worked there for over a decade before. Most security staff knew my name. The elevator carried me swiftly to the top floor, where Eleanor's assistant was waiting to escort me. "Welcome to Meridian," she said, her smile genuine. "Everyone's been looking forward to your arrival." The executive suite was arranged around a central collaborative space with private offices along the perimeter. Eleanor emerged from one of these offices as I approached, her expression triumphant. "Perfect timing," she said, extending her hand. "The team is assembled in the conference room for your welcome briefing." I followed her through glass doors into a spacious room where approximately 20 people sat waiting: senior developers, analysts, project managers, and executives. All stood when I entered, a gesture of respect I'd never experienced at Preston Blackwell. "For those who haven't had the pleasure yet," Eleanor announced, "this is Sophia Chen, our new Chief Technology Officer and partner in our Wealth Management Innovation Initiative." Chief Technology Officer, partner. The titles settled over me like a perfectly tailored garment, fitting in a way that my previous roles never had. "Thank you," I said, surveying the attentive faces around the table. "I'm excited to build something extraordinary with all of you." Eleanor gestured to the head of the table, a position I'd rarely been offered in my previous firm. "Would you like to share your initial vision for the division?" Without hesitation, I moved to the indicated spot and began outlining the future. I'd been mentally constructing for months. Not with the hesitant deference I'd been conditioned to display at Preston Blackwell, but with the confidence of someone whose expertise was recognized and valued. "Our advantage isn't just technological," I explained, warming to my subject. "It's philosophical. Traditional wealth management firms like Preston Blackwell are built on information asymmetry. The idea that financial expertise should be guarded, parceled out sparingly, and charged for accordingly." Heads nodded around the table as I continued. "We're going to invert that model. Our platform will democratize wealth management through radical transparency, algorithmic efficiency, and client empowerment. We'll still provide expert guidance, but without the artificial barriers and excessive costs that have defined this industry for generations. As I outlined specific technical approaches and strategic positioning, I noticed something striking. People were taking notes. Not just passive nodding, but active engagement with my ideas. Questions followed. Thoughtful, challenging questions that sought to build upon my concepts rather than undermine them. By the end of that initial meeting, we had established clear objectives, assigned preliminary responsibilities, and scheduled focused working sessions for the coming weeks. When we adjourned, several team members lingered to introduce themselves personally. "Your predictive volatility model changed my entire understanding of risk assessment," said Daniel, a senior quantitative analyst who had apparently studied my published work. "I've been hoping to work with you since I read your paper 3 years ago." This kind of recognition, colleague to colleague, expert to expert, felt both foreign and deeply affirming. Later, Eleanor showed me to my office. The corner space I had helped design months earlier, now finished with elegant simplicity. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, including, with delicious irony, the building that housed Preston Blackwell. "We've set up your systems according to your specifications," Eleanor explained, indicating the dual-monitor workstation and adjacent collaborative area. "And this arrived this morning." She handed me a small package. Inside was a business card, holder crafted from brushed steel. The cards themselves were minimalist in design, bearing the Meridian logo and my name, followed by my titles: Chief Technology Officer, Founding Partner. "There's one more thing," Eleanor added, her expression suggesting she'd saved something significant for last. She handed me a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be legal documents. "Your equity grant agreement," she explained. "As discussed, you're receiving a 4% founding stake in Meridian's Wealth Technology Division, with additional performance-based equity vesting over the next 3 years." I opened the portfolio, scanning the terms that would make me a genuine owner, rather than merely an employee. The contrast with my Preston Blackwell compensation package, where I had received exactly 2 stock option grants in 12 years, could not have been starker. "The board unanimously approved these terms," Eleanor added. "They recognize the value you bring, Sophia." That validation, the formal, contractual recognition of my worth, represented everything Preston Blackwell had withheld despite years of exceptional performance. "Thank you," I said simply, signing the documents with a sense of gravity appropriate to their significance. Eleanor smiled. "Now, shall we discuss our recruitment strategy? I believe you had some specific Preston Blackwell talent in mind." My first week at Meridian passed in a blur of productive activity. Unlike at Preston Blackwell, where bureaucratic hurdles and political maneuvering consumed half my energy, Meridian's streamlined decision-making processes allowed for remarkable progress in days rather than months. We finalized the technical architecture for our flagship platform, established development protocols, and began building prototype modules for client testing. I worked closely with Meridian's existing technology team, integrating their strengths with the new approaches I brought from my years of experience. Throughout this intensive period, I maintained a disciplined communication firewall regarding Preston Blackwell's proprietary information. My value to Meridian didn't depend on bringing trade secrets. It stemmed from my expertise, methodologies, and vision for the future of wealth management technology. Meanwhile, industry news outlets had begun reporting on my transition with headlines like "Preston Blackwell Tech Leader Makes Surprising Move to Rival Firm" and "Meridian Poaches Key Innovation Talent in Aggressive Expansion." The financial press, always alert to shifts in competitive positioning, clearly recognized the significance of my move. What none of these reports mentioned, yet, was Meridian's growing ownership stake in Preston Blackwell. That disclosure, was strategically scheduled for the following week, when the regulatory filing would become public. On Friday afternoon, Nora texted me, "Miss you around here. Everything's chaos since you left. Robert trying to explain your systems to Gregory and failing spectacularly." I smiled at the update, but didn't press for details. Nora would make her own decisions about her professional future without undue influence from me. She continued unprompted. Also, client calls asking specifically for you, the Morrison Group especially. Robert dodging questions about your departure. This aligned with Eleanor's intelligence. Several major clients had apparently expressed concern upon learning of my exit, particularly those whose portfolios relied heavily on the algorithmic systems I'd designed. "How are you doing?" I texted back, focusing on her rather than the situation. "Considering my options," she replied. "Lunch sometime next week?" "Absolutely. Name the place." My personal office at Meridian quickly evolved into a command center for our development initiative. Whiteboards covered with architectural diagrams and process flows lined one wall. A digital dashboard displayed real-time progress metrics for various components of our platform. The collaborative area hosted rotating team members working through specific challenges. On Monday morning of my second week, Eleanor stopped by with news. "The regulatory filing went through this morning," she said, closing my office door. "Meridian's 3% ownership stake in Preston and Blackwell is now public information." I nodded, absorbing the significance. "How is the market reacting?" "Preston and Blackwell's share price dropped 3% in pre-market trading," she reported. "Nothing catastrophic, but definitely noticeable. The more interesting reactions are happening behind the scenes." "How so?" "Gregory Kent has been trying to reach our CEO since 7 a.m. 3 voicemails, increasingly agitated. He clearly wasn't prepared for this development." I could imagine the scene at Preston and Blackwell. Emergency meetings, hastily consulted lawyers, frantic strategizing about how to respond to what would be perceived as a hostile move by a competitor. "What's our next step?" I asked. "We've requested a meeting with their board next week to discuss our position as a significant shareholder," Eleanor explained, "and I'd like you to accompany our executive team to that meeting." The prospect was both daunting and deeply satisfying. Won't that be rather provocative? Me returning to Preston and Blackwell as a Meridian partner less than 2 weeks after they eliminated my position? Eleanor's smile was unapologetic. "Provocative is precisely what we're aiming for. Your presence communicates several messages simultaneously about our strategic intent, about the talent we value, and about the potential consequences of Preston and Blackwell's short-sighted decisions." I couldn't help but appreciate the elegant aggression of this approach. "I'll be there." The morning news cycle the following day featured the Meridian, Preston, and Blackwell story prominently in the financial press. Analysts speculated about Meridian's intentions, with some suggesting a full acquisition might be the ultimate goal. Preston and Blackwell issued a terse statement acknowledging Meridian's investment position, while emphasizing their commitment to remaining independent and continuing to serve clients with excellence. My lunch with Nora was scheduled for Wednesday, at a small bistro equidistant from both our offices. She arrived looking simultaneously exhausted and animated, the way people often do when workplace drama reaches fever pitch. "You wouldn't believe what's happening," she said without preamble, after we were seated. "Gregory has been locked in conference rooms with the board for 2 days straight. Robert is practically living on antacids, and the rumor mill is working overtime." I listened with interest but careful neutrality. "Sounds chaotic." "Chaos doesn't begin to cover it," she continued. "The Morrison Fund officially put their relationship under review yesterday. 2 other major clients have requested meetings with leadership to discuss recent developments. And internally, people are updating resumes like it's going out of style." I nodded sympathetically. Uncertainty is always difficult. Nora fixed me with a knowing look. This isn't just uncertainty, Sophia. This is calculated disruption. And you're right in the middle of it, aren't you? Her perception had always been one of her greatest strengths. There was little point in feigning ignorance. I've accepted a position that aligns with my values and recognizes my contributions, I said simply. The timing and circumstances weren't entirely my choice. But the outcome works rather nicely for you, she observed without judgment. It does, I acknowledged. And potentially for others who have been undervalued at Preston and Blackwell as well. Nora set down her fork, her expression suddenly serious. Is that an invitation? It's an observation, I replied carefully. But if you're interested in exploring options, Meridian is building a team of exceptional talent. Your skills would be valuable in that environment. As your assistant again? She asked directly. As director of operations for our new division, I countered. With appropriate compensation, equity participation, and genuine career advancement, opportunities. Her eyes widened slightly. You're serious? Entirely. Your organizational capabilities, client knowledge, and technical aptitude are vastly underutilized in your current role. I've already discussed the position with Eleanor. The offer is ready whenever you are. Nora fell silent, processing this information. I'd need time to consider it. Of course, I assured her. This isn't a limited-time offer. It's a recognition of your value as a professional. By the time we finished lunch, Nora hadn't made a definitive decision, but her thoughtful questions about Meridian's culture and leadership suggested genuine interest. I left her with my personal email address for further conversations, confident that she would carefully weigh her options. Back at Meridian, I found an unexpected visitor waiting in my office, Daniel, the quantitative analyst who had expressed admiration for my previous work. Sorry to intrude, he said, rising as I entered. But I wanted to discuss something important before the end of day. Not an intrusion at all, I assured him, taking my seat and gesturing for him to continue. I've been working on an enhancement to your volatility prediction model, he explained, placing a tablet on my desk. Building on your core methodology, but incorporating some additional factors that might improve accuracy during extreme market events. He walked me through his approach, a sophisticated expansion of the algorithmic framework I'd developed at Preston and Blackwell. His innovations were thoughtful and potentially significant, addressing edge cases my original model handled less effectively. This is impressive work, I said when he finished. Have you implemented a test version? That's actually why I wanted to speak with you, he replied. I need access to historical market data with sufficient granularity to properly validate the approach. At my previous firm, this would have required multiple approval layers and weeks of waiting. I nodded, understanding his concern. At Preston and Blackwell, innovative ideas often died slow deaths in administrative purgatory. You'll have access by tomorrow morning, I told him, and I'd like to allocate 2 additional developers to help you build a proper testing framework. This deserves priority attention. His expression reflected momentary disbelief, followed by evident satisfaction. Thank you, that's unusually efficient. That's by design, I explained. Meridian's competitive advantage isn't just our technical capabilities. It's our ability to move from concept to implementation without unnecessary obstacles. After he left, I reflected on the contrast between this interaction and similar situations at Preston and Blackwell. There, promising innovations were filtered through layers of committees, each adding delays without corresponding value. Here, I could make resource allocation decisions directly, accelerating development cycles dramatically. This organizational fluidity proved crucial as we prepared for the upcoming board meeting with Preston and Blackwell. Eleanor and I worked closely with Meridian's executive team to craft our approach, balancing assertiveness with strategic restraint. We don't want to appear hostile, she emphasized during our planning session. Just very, very determined. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon at Preston and Blackwell's headquarters, my first return to the building since my termination. As our car approached the familiar address, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Nostalgia mingled with vindication, apprehension with confidence. Meridian's delegation included Eleanor, our CEO Jonathan Hayes, our Chief Financial Officer, and me. A streamlined team projecting focused intentionality. We were escorted directly to the main boardroom, where Preston and Blackwell's full board and executive leadership awaited. Gregory's expression when I entered was momentarily unguarded, surprise quickly masked by corporate composure. Robert, seated beside him, studied his tablet with unusual intensity, avoiding eye contact entirely. "Thank you for making time for this discussion," Jonathan began after introductions were complete. "As you're aware, Meridian Capital Partners has established a significant position in Preston and Blackwell, reflecting our confidence in the fundamental value of your organization." The diplomatic opening set a professional tone that belied the tension in the room. Gregory nodded tightly, his response equally measured. "We appreciate your investment perspective. Naturally, we're curious about your intentions as a shareholder." Jonathan smiled. "Our intentions are straightforward. We believe Preston and Blackwell possesses valuable assets and capabilities, but may benefit from fresh strategic thinking in certain areas, particularly regarding technological innovation and next-generation client services." This was the segue we had planned, and Eleanor smoothly continued the narrative. "To that end, we'd like to propose a collaborative approach to addressing these opportunities," she said, her tone collegial despite the underlying assertion of influence. "Beginning with the formation of a joint innovation committee with representatives from both firms." The implications were clear. Meridian was seeking formalized input into Preston and Blackwell's strategic direction without pursuing immediate control. It was a moderate opening position that nonetheless established our serious intentions. Gregory's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a rather unorthodox suggestion. Shareholders typically don't participate directly in operational decisions. Typical shareholders don't bring complementary expertise and market positioning," Eleanor countered smoothly. "Our proposal offers mutual benefits. Meridian's innovation capabilities combined with Preston and Blackwell's established client relationships, a genuine synergy opportunity." Throughout this exchange, I remained purposefully silent, my presence alone serving as a pointed reminder of Preston and Blackwell's recent personnel decisions. Several board members glanced in my direction with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Finally, Robert addressed me directly, his tone carefully neutral. "Ms. Chen, I'm curious about your perspective on this proposed collaboration, given your recent history with both organizations." It was the opening I had anticipated but not actively sought, an invitation to articulate the underlying dynamics that had brought us to this moment. "My perspective is straightforward," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Both firms possess valuable capabilities that could be enhanced through thoughtful integration. Preston and Blackwell has established client relationships and market presence. Meridian brings technological innovation and organizational agility. The question isn't whether collaboration makes strategic sense, but whether cultural differences can be bridged effectively." An older board member leaned forward. "Cultural differences? Different approaches to recognizing and developing talent," I clarified. "Different philosophies regarding innovation versus tradition. Different perspectives on who creates value and how that creation should be rewarded." The room fell silent as the implicit critique registered. I had named the fundamental issue without resorting to personal grievance, the systemic problems that had driven my departure rather than individual slights. Gregory cleared his throat. "These are certainly considerations worth exploring. Perhaps we should establish a smaller working group to discuss potential structures for this innovation committee." It was a delaying tactic, but also a concession that Meridian's position warranted serious engagement. The remainder of the meeting focused on establishing this working group and scheduling follow-up discussions, all conducted with professional courtesy that barely concealed the underlying power dynamics. As we prepared to depart, I noticed several board members watching me with thoughtful expressions, reassessing perhaps the decision to let me go so casually. Whatever their private conclusions, the public narrative had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer the dispensable technical specialist, but a strategic player in an unfolding corporate drama. Outside the building, Eleanor touched my arm lightly. That went exactly as we hoped. You were perfect, present but restrained, articulate without appearing bitter. They're rattled, Jonathan observed as our car pulled away. Gregory expected us to make acquisition overtures he could dramatically reject. Our collaborative approach denies him that easy narrative. I nodded, watching Preston and Blackwell's headquarters recede through the rear window. What they really fear is talent drain. If key personnel follow my path to Meridian, their operational capabilities could be seriously compromised. Speaking of which, Eleanor said, checking her phone, your former assistant Nora has accepted our offer. She'll join us after giving 2 weeks' notice. This news brought genuine satisfaction. Nora's capabilities had been consistently undervalued at Preston and Blackwell, her career progression artificially limited by rigid hierarchical thinking. At Meridian, she would have both the title and authority her skills warranted. Perfect timing, I noted. We're entering the intensive build phase for the platform. Her organizational skills will be invaluable. The following Monday brought the first tangible results of our board meeting strategy. Preston and Blackwell announced the formation of a strategic innovation task force that would explore potential industry partnerships and accelerate technological advancement initiatives. While the press release didn't explicitly mention Meridian, the timing made the connection obvious to industry observers. More significantly, Edward Morrison called Eleanor directly to discuss potentially shifting a portion of his fund's assets to Meridian for management. As one of Preston and Blackwell's largest and most prestigious clients, this represented a seismic development with implications beyond the immediate financial impact. He specifically asked if you would be personally involved in overseeing his portfolio technology integration, Eleanor informed me after the call. I assured him you would. This validation, a major client following me to my new firm, carried particular satisfaction given the Christmas holiday I had sacrificed to salvage the Morrison relationship for Preston and Blackwell. The symmetry was too perfect to be coincidental. Perhaps karma did occasionally manifest in the corporate world. As word of Morrison's potential move spread through industry channels, other Preston and Blackwell clients began making inquiries about Meridian's capabilities and approach. Each conversation highlighted the personal relationships I had built over the years, connections based on delivered value rather than institutional loyalty. By mid-October, our team at Meridian had grown to include 3 additional former Preston and Blackwell employees besides Nora, a senior developer, a quantitative analyst, and a client relationship specialist. Each brought valuable institutional knowledge and technical expertise, accelerating our platform development without compromising any confidentiality obligations. This strategic talent acquisition didn't go unnoticed at Preston and Blackwell. Robert Seitz initiated a series of retention interviews with remaining technical staff, suddenly emphasizing their importance to the firm's future. Compensation packages were hastily revised upward. Promotion timelines were accelerated. The very recognition that had been withheld for years was now deployed as a defensive measure. For some, these belated gestures proved sufficient. For others, the contrast between Preston and Blackwell's reactive generosity and Meridian's foundational values only highlighted the cultural differences I had referenced in the board meeting. By the end of October, we had completed the initial architecture for Meridian's wealth management platform and begun developing the core modules. Our timeline projected a beta release in January, coinciding with the industry's annual technology showcase where Preston and Blackwell traditionally announced their yearly innovations. This parallel development created an interesting dynamic. While Preston and Blackwell scrambled to stabilize their technical capabilities and reassure nervous clients, we were building something genuinely new, an integrated wealth management ecosystem that eliminated traditional friction points between advisors and clients. The contrast was particularly evident in our respective approaches to client data visualization. Preston and Blackwell's systems presented information in traditional formats, designed primarily for advisor interpretation. Our platform reimagined this relationship entirely, providing clients with intuitive interfaces that revealed patterns and insights directly, positioning advisors as collaborators rather than gatekeepers. This philosophical difference extended throughout our design approach. Where Preston and Blackwell's systems subtly reinforced information asymmetry, ours systematically eliminated it. Where their pricing model obscured costs through complex fee structures, ours offered radical transparency. "This isn't just a better wealth management platform," Daniel observed during one of our development reviews. "It's a fundamentally different conception of the advisor-client relationship." He was right, and that difference represented our greatest competitive advantage. While Preston and Blackwell focused on preserving their traditional model against Meridian's incursion, we were rendering that model increasingly obsolete. Nora joined us in early November, bringing her exceptional organizational capabilities and deep knowledge of client preferences. Her first week coincided with a significant milestone. The Morrison Fund officially transferred 30% of their assets to Meridian's management, with a staged plan for potential further reallocation based on performance metrics. "Edward Morrison called me personally to confirm the transfer," Eleanor reported during our leadership meeting. "He made a point of saying this decision was based specifically on Sophia's involvement and our commitment to technological innovation." The validation was professionally satisfying, but the timing carried personal significance as well. Almost exactly 1 year had passed since I had sacrificed my holiday plans to address the Morrison account issues, work for which Robert had claimed credit while I canceled flights and missed family gatherings. Now, Robert was reportedly working weekends trying to stabilize the systems I had built while I was leading a team creating their replacement. The symmetry was not lost on me or my colleagues who had made similar transitions. I heard Robert presented an emergency proposal to the board for accelerated technology investment, Nora mentioned during our afternoon check-in. Apparently, it was approved on the spot. No committees, no extended review process. Fascinating. How quickly bureaucratic obstacles disappear when fear enters the equation, I observed. She nodded knowingly. Too late for some of us, though. As November progressed, our platform development accelerated. The team had coalesced into a high-functioning unit with clear communication channels and shared objectives. The collaborative environment we had established proved particularly effective for integrating diverse perspectives, quantitative precision balanced with usability considerations, technical elegance with practical implementation needs. Eleanor stopped by my office one evening as I was reviewing the latest algorithm performance metrics. "The board is impressed with your progress," she said, settling into a chair opposite my desk. "They've approved the additional funding for the expanded client testing phase." "Perfect timing," I replied. "We're ready to begin limited deployments next week." She nodded, then added more casually, "They're also interested in accelerating our Preston and Blackwell strategy. Jonathan is preparing an approach regarding board representation." This development, seeking a formal seat on Preston and Blackwell's board of directors, represented a significant escalation of Meridian's influence campaign. As a major shareholder, the request carried legitimate governance implications that would be difficult for Preston and Blackwell to dismiss outright. "Any thoughts on who should fill that seat?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Eleanor's smile confirmed my suspicion. "The board feels you would be the ideal representative, given your unique understanding of both organizations. The prospect of returning to Preston and Blackwell as a board member, with governance authority over the same executives who had terminated my employment, carried undeniable poetic justice. Yet my motivation wasn't personal vindication, but strategic opportunity. Board representation would provide invaluable insights into Preston and Blackwell's defensive measures, while positioning Meridian to influence their technological direction. "I'd be honored to serve in that capacity," I said simply. The formal request went to Preston and Blackwell's board the following week, initiating another round of corporate maneuvering. Their initial response was non-committal, acknowledging Meridian's right to seek representation while citing governance process requirements that would delay any decision. This dilatory approach was predictable, but ultimately futile. Industry analysts had begun commenting on the shifting competitive dynamics between the firms, with several noting the talent migration from Preston and Blackwell to Meridian as indicative of deeper organizational issues. A particularly pointed article in the Financial Times described Preston and Blackwell as hemorrhaging technical talent, while Meridian was strategically accumulating innovative capabilities. The piece specifically highlighted my transition as emblematic of this trend, quoting anonymous sources who characterized Preston and Blackwell's management approach as dangerously complacent in a rapidly evolving industry. Gregory issued a public response that emphasized Preston and Blackwell's continuing commitment to technological excellence and announced expanded investment in their digital infrastructure. The statement notably avoided mentioning Meridian directly, creating an awkward omission given the context that prompted the announcement. By early December, our platform development had progressed to the stage where we could begin controlled client testing. The Morrison Fund was our primary pilot partner, with their quantitative team working directly with ours to refine functionality and performance metrics. "This is genuinely revolutionary," Edward Morrison commented during a progress review. "The transparency alone changes the entire client experience, but the predictive capabilities take it to another level entirely." His enthusiasm validated our fundamental approach while providing valuable feedback for further refinement. Each iteration brought incremental improvements, with the platform's machine learning components continuously enhancing predictive accuracy based on usage patterns and outcomes. As the holiday season approached, my first at Meridian, the contrast with my previous year's experience could not have been more striking. Instead of sacrificing personal time for unrecognized corporate emergencies, I was leading a team toward a launch that would bear my professional imprint from conception to implementation. Eleanor's holiday gift to the leadership team captured this difference perfectly. Custom-designed desk clocks inscribed with the phrase, "Time reclaimed." The message was subtle but clear. At Meridian, we valued not just professional contributions, but the personal lives that sustained them. The week before Christmas, Preston and Blackwell finally responded formally to Meridian's board representation request. Their carefully worded letter acknowledged our significant ownership position while proposing a compromise. Rather than a board seat, they offered Meridian representation on their newly formed Strategic Advisory Council, with limited but formal input into technological direction. "It's a delaying tactic," Jonathan observed during our executive discussion of this response, "but also a concession that they can't simply ignore our position." Eleanor agreed. "We should accept this interim arrangement while making clear our continuing interest in full board representation." As we finalized this response, another significant development emerged. 2 additional Preston and Blackwell clients had indicated interest in transitioning portions of their portfolios to Meridian management, specifically citing our technological innovations as the primary motivation. The momentum was unmistakable. What had begun as my personal career transition had evolved into a broader market repositioning, with Meridian steadily gaining influence at Preston and Blackwell's expense. The venture I had joined as a partner was becoming a genuine industry disruptor, challenging traditional models while delivering measurable client value. On Christmas Eve, Exactly 1 year after I had worked alone in Preston and Blackwell's deserted office, Meridian hosted a holiday gathering for all employees and their families. The contrast could not have been more pronounced. Where I had once sacrificed personal connections for corporate demands, I now stood surrounded by colleagues who had become genuine collaborators, celebrating not just professional accomplishments, but shared values. Eleanor raised a toast that captured this transformation perfectly. To building something worthy of our talents, together. As I looked around at the team we had assembled, many of them former Preston and Blackwell employees now thriving in their new roles, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This wasn't merely about personal vindication or competitive advantage. It was about creating an environment where exceptional people could do exceptional work, recognized and rewarded appropriately. That evening, as holiday lights glittered, across the Chicago skyline, I received an unexpected message from Gregory Kent himself. "Sophia," it read, "I realize this is unconventional, but I'd appreciate the opportunity to speak privately after the holidays. There are matters I believe we should discuss directly, outside official channels." The request was surprising but not entirely unexpected. As Preston and Blackwell's challenges mounted and Meridian's influence grew, Gregory was likely seeking some form of accommodation, perhaps even reconciliation. I considered my response carefully before typing. "I'm open to a conversation in the new year. Happy holidays, Gregory." His reply came almost immediately. "Thank you. And Sophia, for what it's worth, I recognize now that we made a significant mistake. One of many, I suspect." That acknowledgement, however belated and self-interested, represented a shift in perspective that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Whether it reflected genuine insight or merely tactical necessity remained to be seen. As the year drew to a close, our platform development neared completion, with the public launch scheduled for mid-January. The team had executed brilliantly, overcoming technical challenges while maintaining our ambitious timeline. Early client feedback had been overwhelmingly positive, with several major firms expressing interest in becoming early adopters. What had begun as my personal response to years of undervaluation had evolved into something much more significant, a genuine alternative to traditional wealth management approaches, built on principles of transparency, efficiency, and client empowerment. In reflecting on this transformation, I recognized that Preston and Blackwell had inadvertently given me an invaluable gift by terminating my position. They had freed me to build something aligned with my values, surrounded by people who shared that vision. As we prepared for the new year and the platform launch that would formalize Meridian's challenge to established industry players, I felt neither resentment nor regret regarding my former employer. Those emotions had been replaced by something more constructive, the quiet satisfaction of building something better. The conversation with Gregory would happen, and negotiations regarding Meridian's influence at Preston and Blackwell would continue. But the fundamental direction was clear. We weren't simply competing with traditional firms. We were redefining the competition itself. And in that redefinition lay the most meaningful vindication of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.